Welcome to ADHD Realities with your host, Leanne Borneman, sexologist and certified sex therapist. So let's talk about pleasure for us women and ADHD. Before, however, I can get into the ADHD aspect and the pleasure, we need to go down this history lane of women's pleasure. So we live in a patriarchy. We can't deny it, right? And when we're talking about this history of our pleasure, the most specific space to go back to is the Victorian American era. And during this time, society and the physicians of the time did not place a relationship between external genital stimulation with sexual practice. Because during the late 1800s, physicians actually believed that stimulation through clitoral options was a medical thing to reduce symptoms of what they called hysteria. And physicians used female hysteria as this diagnosis for women who reported a wide range of complaints or symptoms that basically were just not something that was a thing somebody can explain. So just keep in mind, during this time, any type of stimulation was not correlated with sexual practice or satisfaction. It was specifically a medical reason. And during this time, women and their job was to please their husbands, please their partners. And sex was not about them. It was all about the man because sex was had when the man wanted it. And it's actually hypothesized during this time. I don't know if there's actual record of it, so I stay in the lane of it's been hypothesized that vibrators actually were created because doctors literally were just tired of having to rub one out for all the women. Their wrists got tired. So vibrators were apparently created. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't really know, but that's neither here nor there. Let's focus on pleasure. When you look at this, okay, yeah, women's pleasure is not set up for our success whatsoever. That's not the stage that we're putting a spotlight on. And fast forward to today, I don't know about you, but I see a lot of repetition in that mindset, right? And we can see that when we look at something called this orgasm gap. And it's this concept that female pleasure is not being at the forefront. And we know this because when we compare male orgasms with female orgasms are through the roof and female orgasms not so much. Hence, orgasm gap. Now, most sex, when we're just looking at sex heterosexually in our relationships, and I'm going to give you a reason why I'm focusing on heterosexual relationships here, it's not set up for our success. We know this when we compare data and research towards individuals who are lesbians. We see a complete shift in the increase and experience around orgasms for women in same coupled relationships versus women in heterosexual relationships. When you look at heterosexual sex, the foreplay is actually, for most women, the main course. Hiding that disco stick is not the main course for a woman for the most part. That's the main course for the man, because how do you know sex is over? When that man's disco stick explodes. And whose pleasure then is that set up for? If sex ultimately ends when the disco stick explodes. Now keep in mind, I'm well aware not all relationships, not all intimacy looks like this. And I promise I'm getting to the ADHD piece. Now, this is not to say, and I have to remind people this, that there are women out there that enjoy playing hide the disco stick. But when we look specifically at the research and even my clinical practice, it shows that many women are not screaming from these rooftops with excitement from it alone. Rather, you have a crap load of women faking orgasms, not enjoying the actual time that they're having with their partners. And I will also give this other disclaimer that most men that I've worked with their wives or couples or partners, they're not like this asshole in the room, right? Like, they are under the same script narrative that has been shoved down our throats when it comes to heterosexual sex, and they automatically make this assumption that, yeah, okay, this is what we have to do to please each other. Cool. right? So when they come into my door and we talk more about this, they're like, holy shit, this actually isn't pleasing you? Oh, well, what can I do, right? Now, I'm going to stop right there for a second and talk about the importance of our pleasure, our accountability. So, our pleasure is our responsibility. We are accountable to create that. Now, that's not to say it would be great when our partners want to be active participants in our pleasure, right? Who doesn't love that? But at the end of the day, our pleasure, our responsibility. So we also have to learn how to communicate. Now, here's that ADHD piece that's missing that now we're going to dive into. When it comes to ADHD and I say communication, oof, there's a lot of barriers there. So just think of the executive functioning piece, right? Well, in order for us to conversate effectively, we need to plan, problem solve, regulate, both through motivation, emotion. We need to have some self-awareness, but then there's this level of processing delays that could occur for many individuals with ADHD. And so sometimes conflict is not something that's really set up for our success. Because I can't tell you how many times I've entered a conversation or I've had clients enter a conversation where if you're trying to have a conversation face to face with somebody, you're going to like shut down, your processing isn't there. And when you're thinking of a conversation, typically, neurotypically, the expectations are I say something, you say something back. I say something, you say something back. You need to be able to process at a certain capacity for you to be able to effectively show up to the show that way. And for us ADHDers, we can struggle immensely in this area where you just said something and it's taken us a freaking minute to try and process that. And then let's just say the thing that we're trying to talk about is really uncomfortable for us or needs vulnerability. Well, now we can shut down even further because now let's say, are you an ADHDer that also experiences people pleasing? Are you an ADHDer that experiences rejection sensitivity dysphoria? You know, because if those two things come into the play, you're not going to be showing up with the foot forward where you're able to produce a conversation that's effective in terms of voicing your needs, your concerns. But also you may come into it fearing you're going to be criticized or rejected, right? And that also is going to be solely dependent on how your partner shows up to the conversation. You can never have a conversation with somebody that doesn't also have the tools to sit and actually actively listen and learn how to get to an end result together, right? So going back to conflict and communicating our needs, if you're an ADHD woman and you're struggling to enjoy the time you're spending in the bedroom with your partner, and the answer is communicating, there's a few things that I want to be mindful of here. One of those things is if communicating face-to-face doesn't work, finding out what works for you. So this concept and this idea of you have to have conversations face-to-face. That's the adult way. Yeah, you can yeet that fucking advice out the window. I'm sorry. I'm done with that. It is all about what works for you. What works for your relationship, not what other people tell you what you need and should be doing in your relationship. They're not in your relationship, so they can go kick rocks, right? What works for you? What works for me and what works for some of my clients who have ADHD and struggle with that communication piece is texting, emailing, writing a letter. These are safe ways to be supportive to our needs as ADHDers when we're talking about the executive functioning piece. Because again, remember, there's deficits up there, right? And so it's going to be really important for us to support our deficits so we can show up and execute our needs. So communication, right? There's this other piece for us ADHDers that's really important that you have to also figure out like what's going on that's causing the disconnect in you enjoying the time you're having with your partner. Sometimes it's as easy as I don't like disco being hidden. Doesn't do anything for me. I like this. External stimulation, right? Sometimes not so much. It's not that easy. Sometimes there are things that are behind the scenes that are causing a disconnect. One of those things could be you have a heavy expectation placed on yourself that you're supposed to enjoy this stuff, and you haven't actually explored what you like and don't like. And so you really don't know. You don't know what you like, what you don't like. Or maybe you become overstimulated, and that overstimulation is going to cause a disconnect. So that goes into the next piece that's really important, right? Is your experience being overstimulated or understimulated? Whether it being from sensory, being too much or too little, we can become distracted. Maybe we're understimulated. That distraction piece comes from being understimulated. This is why people stim. This is why people have to do things while they're doing something because they're not stimulating enough. Same thing happens in the bedroom. This does not shut off in our bedroom, right? So now, let's say understimulated, overstimulated, distraction. You have all this shit. But then also your playtime just not being set up for your success to begin with around your pleasure. So it's a double whammy. And if you suck at communication, or you feel like you don't have the empowerment to conversate because it's not set up for your success, you're just going to avoid it. And then you're going to be avoiding sex and intimacy. And then you're going to start feeling shame and guilt, which we all have experienced, and something I see all the time with my clients that I work with. That's a clusterfuck of, we don't want that. We want you to feel empowered with your intimacy. We want you to feel good. We want people to be able to say, hey, this is what I want, this is what I don't like. Let's do this, not that, right? So that's the goal here. Two of the most common complaints that I get from women clients with ADHD is, I'm bored or I feel dread, right? That's what I just said. The boredom falls in line with the understimulation. And generally, sensory plays a big role in this. So sensory, we're talking about the 5 senses: smell, taste, sound, sight, tactile, texture, right? Many of the women I work with express this interest in BDSM or kink. But the women I work with are heterosexual. And they generally are too fearful to engage in this interest. And one of the reasons I've uncovered with clients that there is this disconnect of empowerment is because, well, BDSM and kink isn't typically what you see in heterosexual sex or intimacy. Like, that's not what it's supposed to look like, right? And one of the biggest things that we work on is getting out of our head this idea of what should look like versus what it needs to look like. And I'm currently doing research on this concept of ADHD and BDSM and kink, and it being an environmental support to our needs, our satisfaction. And I'll definitely make a video about that later on. But when we are focusing on this boredom or this overstimulation, we have to figure out what are those things that are associated with either being understimulated or overstimulated. Now, I'm giving you the insight of what you need to think of, but I'm also understanding that, let's bring back in the executive functioning piece. You're going to kind of struggle with this. It's really hard to reflect because guess what? That takes self-awareness. We have a deficit there, Then strategically trying to figure out the problem and understand maybe a step-by-step play on how to get to a better place. Well, guess what? That also relies on planning and problem solving. Another 2 deficits that we have in our executive functioning piece. So you can do this step by step. One of the best ways is breaking it up strategically, step by step for ourselves. Now, obviously, the best answer is working with somebody who does this for a living and can help kind of create the roadmap and see and put together the pieces for you. But let's say you don't have the time, money, investment to do that avenue. Breaking up things step by step is going to be so important in better understanding the bigger picture for yourself. So all of this has to be done on paper because visual is key for us ADHDers. If you like drawing, I urge you to lean into that creative side. I mean, that would be even a better way to connect to this. But the first step is you're going to want to ask, do you have any sensory conflicts? So does anything generally make you more irritable or disconnected when we're thinking of the senses? And a good example would be like noise, right? Like certain noise can make somebody more irritable. For me, being silence, especially in the bedroom, is overstimulating for me. Like I cannot stand silence. What I want you to do is make the list of all the sensory you like and don't like, right? And that's what we're trying to guide here in step 1. So making that list through reflecting, what are the sensory you like and you don't like, right? What's making you uncomfortable? What makes you feel you're more in line? Step 2, do you have any insecurities that you may be hyperfixating on? And we're all human, so we all got some, right? I mean, I still do. If you do, which I'm sure you do, you don't need to use the energy to change them right away, right? I'm unconventional. I really am. I'm all about more of just like, how do you set your environments up for success? So ask if there are ways you can navigate playtime where you can shut that attention off towards the insecurity. where you're not hyperfixating on it and you're focusing. Because when you're focusing and hyperfixated in the moment in the bedroom, your brakes are going. You're not interested. You're not there. And that is totally problematic when the goal is, I want to show up and have a good time, right? When you think of the word play, play is fun. We want to have fun. We want to be involved, right? So sometimes being able to take your attention off an insecurity can just look like turning off the lights or maybe covering the area of the body you don't feel comfortable with. That is okay. And I would definitely urge you to talk to your partner about this stuff. Like, do this activity together if you feel comfortable. I mean, body doubling is wonderful. Have your partner sit at a table with you while you're doing this and have them also help reflect. Like, are there any insecurities that you notice that I don't notice? Like, getting out of your own head and using somebody else that you can trust and you feel comfortable with can be so beneficial. You do not have to do this alone because you're not having sex alone, are you? Your partner's involved, so why aren't they involved in this process as well? So I always urge people to involve their partner. Step 3, scan your environment in your bedroom time. So pretend you're this fly on the wall when you're having sex with your partner, and what then is typically occurring during your playtime, right? Ask yourself, what sensory that you just listed off that you either like or don't like, how is it showing up in the bedroom or not showing up, right? That is going to be important. And then step 4, communicate that these things are bothering you, whether that be in text or however you feel the need to successfully address the issues. Then, when your partner is aware of it, you can begin to explore changing shit up, right? And again, that's assuming that you didn't have them sit down with you and do this process with you. I can't urge enough that everybody's ADHD is going to be different. How we present is different. So when it comes to our pleasure and how our ADHD is showing up, there is never going to be one video that it's like, aha, I've got this, right? And I've just provided a crap load of information. But even with that being said, I know that there probably are other layers here. This is the work I do with my clients all the time. We unpack all those layers. I help. I'm that other person in the room using my expertise, understanding the executive functioning piece, and really asking and guiding questions that help. So understand that if you do this approach and you're still struggling, that is okay. This is not a step-by-step thing where it's, okay, you're good to go. This is a suggestive approach that I know can be helpful depending on our circumstances. I don't know you. You're watching this from your home. I don't know what are the extra variables that play a hand in your disconnect in the bedroom outside of ADHD. Are you having anxiety, depression? Do you have any other type of trauma? Are you dealing with stressors? Did you get enough sleep? Are you getting enough sleep, right? There are so many things that can play a role. And without the person in the room who's the professional, the therapist that's helping you, not knowing that information, these workshops, these classes, these videos, they're going to be a sprinkle of help. They're never going to be the cure-all. And hopefully, with a lot of them that you find, you're able to pick and choose the things that fit and work for you and your needs, and you're able to create your own understanding of what is needed for your environment to feel success in your pleasure, in your sexuality as an ADHDer. If you want to learn more about ADHD and sexuality and all the things ADHD reality related, hit the subscribe button because I got ADHD. I'm not structured about this at all. And if you're subscribed, you'll know when a new video is released.